Let's just dive right in. Today, we're mapping out what is probably the most profound structural transition we'll see in our lifetimes. We're talking about the shift from human labor to machine capital. But listen, we're not going to sit here and ask that tired old question, will robots take our jobs? No. We're zooming out. We're taking a macroeconomic, institutional view. We're looking at how civilization itself literally has to redesign its economic legitimacy as production shifts away from humans and over to autonomous machines.
There's a principle we really need to keep in mind here. Fiscal systems adapt to the dominant mode of production. Basically, the way a sovereign state generates its revenue always tracks how value is actually created in its economy. Now, this doesn't happen overnight, right? There's always a historical lag, but eventually, the tax base has to align with the production base.
Just look at the historical progression. If you go back to agrarian societies in the 1850s, states taxed what mattered most, land. Fast forward to the height of industrial capitalism in the 1950s, and the system shifted entirely to taxing mass wage labor. That's where we got the income and payroll taxes we all know and love today. And now, as we head into the 2030s and beyond, digital systems and autonomous production are forcing the next massive civilizational shift, straight into a machine economy and post-labor fiscal systems.
So here's our game plan for this explainer. First, we'll look at the signal from Sacramento. Then, the hidden fiscal contradiction. Third, AI as strategic infrastructure. Fourth, taxing the machine stack. Fifth, machine economy federalism. And finally, redesigning civilization. Let's get into it.
Section 1. The signal from Sacramento. Cloud software as a discrete revenue base.
To really ground this high-level macro theory in reality, let's look at something super specific. In May 2026, California Governor Gavin Newsom pitched a brand new tax on cloud-based software sales. It's projected to pull in $1.1 billion in just its first budget year, explicitly targeting large software vendors and the booming AI industry. Now, at first glance, it just looks like a state desperately trying to plug a budget deficit. But if you look closer, in the context of this macro transition, it is actually a massive institutional leading indicator.
So why does this matter so much? Because the architecture of this proposal is honestly far more important than the dollar amount. California is conceptually positioning cloud software and digital productivity as its own discrete revenue base. By targeting software sales directly, they're basically saying that software is now sufficiently profitable and, crucially, sufficiently independent from human labor to warrant its own unique tax treatment. And it's no coincidence this is happening right in the middle of a massive AI infrastructure buildout.
Section 2. The hidden fiscal contradiction, subsidizing automation versus taxing labor.
Okay. This brings us to the central structural tension underneath pretty much every modern welfare state today. It's a huge unresolved conflict. On one hand, governments desperately want AI leadership. They want massive productivity growth, sovereign compute capabilities, and automation at scale. They are actively subsidizing this future. But on the other hand, what do they actually depend on to keep the lights on right now? Labor taxation, payroll taxes, pension contributions. They rely on a consumption economy that is 100% funded by human wages.
This right here is the absolute core contradiction of the AI boom. Governments are aggressively accelerating a future that literally requires fewer taxable humans, while simultaneously trying to fund their present operations using a system built entirely on taxing those exact same humans. You see the problem, right? You just cannot maintain highly indebted welfare states if machine productivity captures more and more of the economic pie, but doesn't generate a corresponding share of taxable wages. The math simply doesn't work.
Section 3. AI as strategic infrastructure. From software product to economic utility.
To figure out how governments are actually going to solve this, we have to completely stop viewing AI as just some neat consumer software product. We need to shift our mental model to what's known as the machine economy stack. AI is not just code anymore, folks. It is capital-intensive economic infrastructure. Think of it more like the power grid or a national telecommunications network. It requires massive physical inputs, immense amounts of energy, and incredibly complex coordination just to function.
Check out how this stack actually builds out across different layers. You've got layer 2 handling energy and compute. So, your data centers and your massive GPU clusters. Then up at layer 4, you have logic and orchestration, which are the actual AI models themselves. Because AI is becoming so deeply embedded in economic production that an outage would literally feel like an electricity blackout. States are going to increasingly view these layers as critical infrastructure. And if history tells us anything, infrastructure, like water, power, transit, always gets regulated, licensed, and eventually heavily taxed by the state.
Section 4. Taxing the machine stack. Programmable settlement as a taxation substrate.
Now, the historical bottleneck here has always been pretty obvious. How on earth do you actually tax a machine's productivity in real time? Until recently, machines didn't have legal identities. Their output was just buried inside corporate financial statements. But look at layer 5 of this stack: identity, settlement, and liability. As we deploy autonomous agents, we're actually giving them machine identities and putting them on programmable settlement rails, like stablecoins or central bank digital currencies. Once machine-to-machine commerce is flowing through these programmable pipes, applying an automatic tax at the exact moment of the transaction becomes incredibly simple.
And honestly, this is the great irony of the entire machine economy transition. Governments won't even have to spend billions of dollars building this massive surveillance and taxation infrastructure. Private commercial firms are literally building it for them right now. It just arrives by default as this latent fiscal capability. It's going to give states the power to observe and ultimately tax autonomous economic output at a microscopic level.
Section 5. Machine Economy Federalism. Geographic divergence and fiscal arbitrage.
Now, this shift isn't just happening smoothly or uniformly everywhere. It's creating deep geographic divergence and really fierce jurisdictional competition over who gets the infrastructure and who gets the revenue. We're actually watching a completely new layer of federalism being drawn in real time right across the United States. States are taking radically different paths to manage the arrival of the machine economy, and they are splitting based on their own structural advantages and political pressures.
So on one side, you have infrastructure attraction states, places like Texas, Virginia, Nevada. They offer energy abundance, fast permitting, and pro-business incentives to lure in these massive data centers. But on the other side, you have machine taxation pressure states, places like California, New York, Illinois. They've got the deep talent pools, sure, but they also have massive fiscal pressures, aging populations, and huge demands for public services. The structural tension is obvious. The jurisdictions that are best positioned to physically host the machine infrastructure are very often not the ones that are politically desperate to tax it.
Section 6. Redesigning civilization. Sovereign demand stabilization.
All right, this brings us to the long-term macroeconomic reality of a post-labor fiscal system. When we talk about things like universal basic income or machine-funded welfare, we really need to strip away all the usual political baggage. In a highly automated economy, these aren't utopian ideological choices. They're basically essential macroeconomic plumbing. Think about it. If a machine economy produces endless abundant goods, but human beings don't have the wages to actually buy them, the whole system collapses. Redistribution basically becomes necessary simply to preserve demand circulation.
Just consider the sheer magnitude of this paradigm shift. Under industrial capitalism, human labor is the primary productive unit. Citizens are workers, and the state survives by taxing their labor income. But in this emerging machine capitalism, machines become the primary productive unit. Citizens transition to being just consumers and capital owners, and the state has to figure out how to derive its revenue directly from machine productivity. And here's the kicker. The institutional apparatus to actually run that emerging system, it doesn't exist yet, anywhere in the world.
Which leaves us with the ultimate systemic challenge. The fundamental social contract between citizens, capital, and the state is actively being renegotiated right beneath our feet. So how does civilization redesign its economic legitimacy once human labor completely ceases to be its primary taxable engine? It's not just a philosophical thought experiment. It's a structural question that every single sovereign state is going to have to answer in the coming decades.